Feels good to be back on the Tenere. First time since I got my Transalp out in the woods, dinking around, and I thought, why not just verbalize what I'm feeling differences-wise between the Transalp and the Tenere now that I have both. Yeah, most of you know I've had this Tenere for what, 18 months? So 2022, put almost 4,000 miles on it. I rode it to Canada and back. I also spent a bunch of time on a Tenere in Mexico, taking on some of the hardest stuff I've ever done on an adventure bike. It wasn't this Tenere, it was a rental, but there's another 2,000 miles there I did on Teneres. So I spent some time on them, and I know one of the biggest questions about the new Transalp 750 is how does it compare to the Tenere? And I feel like as a person that has both at the moment, I'm probably uniquely qualified to answer that question. This is not the full comparison video because I really want to get my Transalp fully protected and then really do some more difficult off-road stuff on it. I've only done some light off-road stuff because it's still in stock form right now. But I came out on the Tenere today because I wanted to collect my thoughts about the differences while the Transalp is fresh in my mind and the things I noticed going from one to the other, and I just thought maybe that's interesting to some of you. So here we are. I don't really even have a destination in mind today. We're just going to see where we end up. Let's talk about the things I noticed immediately when I hop on this bike after having ridden the Transalp. Actually, the first thing I noticed was before I even got on it. It was moving it around in the garage because I had to push the Transalp forward to get it out of the way so I could move the Tenere out. I never really put much stock in the whole top-heavy Tenere complaint before, but holy crap, doing that back-to-back, I could notice the difference immediately. They weigh just about the same amount, but this thing feels so much harder to move around, way more unwieldy because all that weight is up top, and so the second it starts to lean in one direction or the other, you have to support it. Versus the Transalp, I don't have to think about it very much. These leaves are so slippery too. I just move it without really thinking about whether it's leaning, or it doesn't cause me to think about it. And I think that's going to be a theme actually of my comparison, because there's a lot of things on this bike that I think about that I don't think about on the Transalp because they're just easier. Don't read too much into it, because easier doesn't mean better. Doesn't mean the bike is better, depending on what you're trying to do. So the first thing is moving it around. You can feel the top heaviness when you move one and then the other. It's a marked difference, a noticeable difference. And the same applies when you get on it and start just like leaning it over or whatever. You can feel that the Tenere gets heavy much faster. The Transalp weight is much lower down, and you can tip it a lot farther before you feel that weight kick in. Second thing I notice is obviously seat height. When I get on this bike, I'm tippy toes, and even then, if it's not perfectly flat ground, it's a little bit of a dance to get one or the other down, but not both at the same time. On the Transalp, I have not one time thought about getting my feet down. The seat height is just lower. It's just easier. You're down in the bike more on the Transalp, and here on the Tenere, you're on it. I just stopped to take my headphones out and readjust everything, and I could not get my foot down. I was on a gentle slope, and I could not get the kickstand down enough. Just set the bike on it while I was fiddling with everything. I have not had that problem once with the Transalp yet, and again, it's just that function of that lower seat height. So I have to carefully pick where I stop. I have a 30-inch inseam. You know, if you're 6'2", you're not going to care about any of this, but if you're average height like I am, it does matter. I have to pay attention to where I stop with the Tenere. It's kind of like my 450L that way, because I can't get both feet down solidly at the same time, and I don't have much wiggle room to lean it one way or the other without the weight starting to feel overwhelming. So it's always a bit of a challenge to get it back up off the kickstand on uneven ground to lean it over to the right, or to trust it enough to go down onto the kickstand without continuing to move once that weight gets past the point where I feel like I can support it with my leg barely on the ground, or not at all on uneven ground. So that's another thing that's just top of mind when you're riding the Tenere. That's not top of mind at all on the Transalp. One thing I thought of right as I pulled in here today is the Tenere is a lot less fiddly. It is a far simpler machine, and that's a good thing in a lot of ways. Like, I didn't have to change the riding mode when I got off-road, or when I got onto this crappier paved road, or when I hit the gravel up here. There's no riding mode I'm going to change. The only thing I can change here is turning the ABS off, and honestly, it's never bothered me on the Tenere, even in the sand, really. Like, I've never had it really kick in a way that really bothered me, so I mostly just run it. So I don't even bother to turn it off. I just go on and off-road without thinking about it. On the Tenere and on the Transalp, the ABS is super aggressive, so it's got to be turned off, which means I have to stop and adjust two settings, because you can't, even in the custom modes, get the traction control all the way off. So it's fiddly. Definitely it takes more doing to get from place to place, to stop and transition from one type of riding to another type of riding. The Tenere just is what it is, and it just goes, and you deal with it. that's a double-edged sword, because here I was just a second ago riding on that super loose, like all those decaying leaves on this wet pavement, and I'm like pussyfooting it because it's real easy to spin this back tire on super loose stuff like that. And on the Transalp, I could just click it into rain mode, which is actually, it's very simple to switch modes on the fly. You just can't shut off your traction control and your ABS on the fly, or simply at all. So again, double-edged sword, depends on what you want. The Tenere is definitely harder to ride. It requires more of you. It's a bike for more advanced riders. Not to say you have to be advanced, but it's definitely not for beginners. I think the Transalp has enough rider aids and other just concessions that a new rider could probably survive on it. I don't know that it would be the first thing I recommended to them, but you could get it and grow into it. This thing, it's harder to ride. You really need to have some confidence and some skills built up to get the most out of it, and the trade-off for that is it's more capable off-road in every scenario. It really is. More ground clearance, you know, it's got that, I don't remember what they call it, but the way that the rear swing arm is angled so that it drives the rear wheel into the ground to give you maximum traction, both on the front and the rear, because it pushes the front of the bike down to help you steer when you're under acceleration. Like, Transalp doesn't have that. Tenere is better off-road. How much better is it off-road, and is it more of a difference than how much better the Transalp is on-road? Does that make sense? Is the sum of all of its parts greater on one or the other, and or what is your primary focus, because that will determine what you do with it. If you're never going to do serious off-road, that Transalp's going to be great. And it's so much easier to ride in every other situation, especially for a new rider. But if you want the most capable adventure bike you can find that also happens to be Japanese, you want to ride off-road without thinking about it, the way that you can ride the Transalp on-road without thinking about it, well, Tenere is maybe a better choice. I don't think there's going to be any earth-shattering revelations here, other than I think the Transalp is better than I expected it to be, and it might be enough for most people for what the level of off-road riding they're going to do, unless they're trying to get crazy. And you know, we tackled the toughest stuff I've ever done on an adventure bike was in Mexico, riding through sand washes and riverbeds. I don't know that I'd want the Transalp on that stuff. Transalp is a faster bike. It's got more horsepower, but the Tenere is geared lower and it's easier to use in off-road situations. It's easier to get, yeah, the burst of speed you need to get the front wheel up, things like that. Part of it is this has a cable, throttle cable, so you're going to have a more immediate response, and the Transalp is throttle by wire. And the Transalp has a lot more creature comforts. It's got all the modes and the fancy display, and I know that the new Tenere has a nicer display, but it doesn't have everything that the Transalp has. But one thing the Tenere has that the Transalp does not have, ambient temperature, which pisses me off, because on an adventure bike, that's a super useful thing to have. I do not understand why you would ship an adventure bike, especially when you can monitor the engine coolant temperature. I don't give a shit about that. I don't know what's high and what's low. Just give me a gauge or an idiot light for that. I don't need to know that I'm at 247 degrees. What does that even mean? Versus, I'd sure like to know that it's 60 degrees or 40 degrees, or if it's below freezing and I need to worry about ice. Like, that's super handy information to have. Far more useful, I think, to me. Your mileage may vary. Just like feel-wise, this thing feels so much more like a dual sport, like a dirt bike, like skinny, rough. You know, it's bouncing you around. The suspension's stiff. I know the suspension on this is better, stock suspension. Obviously, it's a more off-road performance-oriented bike. I don't think any of that is a surprise. But I have missed her. I love riding this thing. God, I love this bike. Not excited about the day when I might have to choose, because I can't. It doesn't make any sense to keep two bikes that are so similar in my garage. Anybody else out there have one of each? What are you thinking? Or have a lot of Tenere experience and you're getting your hands on a Transalp? I do think the Tenere is more specialized. It's more for, like I said, more experienced riders who know exactly what they're after, and they know that the Tenere is it. If you're a new rider or you're not sure, I would probably point you towards a Transalp, just because it's going to be easier for you to ride and figure out. And then if you get to the point where you feel like you've reached the limitations of that motorcycle, you'll really appreciate the difference between it and the Tenere. But at first, you're not going to be able to tell. All you're going to notice is that it's like top heavier and harder to get your feet down on the Tenere. Yeah, see, the rear ABS, the ABS in this is not super aggressive. I just slid the rear. It still slows you down. Some ABS is way too aggressive and you can't even slow down. It's annoying, dude. Oh yeah. There's my turn. Turning radius is better on the Transalp, I'll tell you that much. It has a super tight turning radius. Yeah, even just like dinking around, turning around, like definitely notice whether you can get your foot down or not. And I'm sliding the rear quite a bit climbing this hill because no traction control. Although that, I don't know if that's a disadvantage because it would be off on the Transalp anyway, or I wouldn't even be able to come up the hill. So you know, if you want to jump and stuff, it's kind of like, okay, here's a good comparison. I like this. This is good. The Transalp is like the 300L. Easier to ride, more forgiving for a new rider, more streetable. You know, it doesn't require as much of you. It's less mindful. It's easier to get your feet down, whatever. And the Tenere here is the DRZ 400. More fun for a rider with a little bit more experience, but also intimidating and more difficult to ride for a newer rider. And one that if you get one and then outgrow it, you'll really appreciate the difference. But if you start on one, I don't know that you ever will. If you start on the harder one to ride. This is a cool road. I don't get up here enough. I haven't been down here in a while, dude. I'm not on a big bike. In fact, I may have been on the DRZ last time I was here. Beautiful, though, this time of year. Lovely fall foliage. A lot of people have asked about the low-end torque and grunt and featherability of the Transalp, and it's definitely geared higher, like it's more of a street gearing, but I haven't had any trouble doing just crawly stuff like this even on it. I felt like I had pretty good control with the clutch and everything down low, so I guess the Tenere is marginally better, but it's not something that you're going to notice a lot. Man, it is slippery out here, dude. See, a spot like this, if you were a new rider, that traction control on the Transalp would be handy, just to keep it on like one to keep you from totally sliding out if you're just not good at using your clutch as traction control. Okay, let's see how overgrown and stupid I am. Can I get under that? Let's see. Who said all these branches? Honestly, if there's a camp spot down here, this would be awesome. Okay, here's a situation where it sucks that I'm on the taller bike, because waddling under this is difficult on the tall bike, and it would be less so on the less tall bike, because I can only get one foot down right now because this ground is not even. Oh, there you go. Point for the Transalp. What am I doing? And why is my visor open? Oh, I'm also using my hippo hands today, which are saving me from all these damn blackberry briars at the moment. This is not adventure bike territory, man. What the hell are you doing? Whatever. There we go. There's a really nice spot to turn around up here that I'm inching towards, and I'm probably just digging my own grave instead of just stopping right here and doing it. Yeah, this is dumb. Okay. Here's a situation where I wish I was on the Transalp. This is actually relevant because it's not the worst place on earth to turn around, but if I was on the Transalp, I would just pop up on that hillside and turn around without getting off the bike, because I can get my feet down more easily. And I'm tiptoes here on this thing, so I'm going to get off and move it around. Again, it's not the end of the world, but it is a difference. There we go. Okay. That'll get us out. That'll get us out. Okay. Back up through the messed up stuff, and we're going pretty uphill here. You won't be able to tell, but you're just gonna have to trust me. So it just depends on what you want to do overall, I feel like. But I also feel like, and it pains me to say this because I think this Tenere is one of the best bikes ever made. Really is. But for most users, for most people, depending on their skill level, Transalp's gonna make a lot more sense. Yeah, farther over is much easier, bro. There we go. Putting this MSR gear to the test for reals. Could have turned around right here, but I didn't, because your boy is a dumbass. That's sort of where I'm leaning with the Transalp right now, is I feel like it's a great bike for the masses, for the slightly above beginner to the slightly below expert. Everyone else is really going to enjoy it. And that is smart business practices on Honda's part, because that is where the vast majority of people fall, which means biggest mass market appeal, which means sales, which is what these manufacturers are in it for. People forget that. They're always like, why would Honda not make the best adventure bike ever? Because it's not going to sell. Like, and there's already one that exists, like the 890 exists. they've kind of got that market cornered in terms of most capable adventure bike and all the trade-offs that come with that. What Honda wants to do is sell the most motorcycles possible, and by creating a bike with the biggest market appeal to the biggest, largest, widest group of people, that's how they're going to do that. The engineers at Honda, I mean, some of them are probably riders, but they're not out there trying to design the coolest, best adventure motorcycle ever. They're trying to design the best-selling one ever, and those are different things. I will say this, on the Tenere, it definitely has more of that. Come on, let's go faster. Come on, you can do this, you can tackle this, whatever. Like, it definitely feels far more raring to go on the off-road stuff. Feels like the limitation is always the rider. It's a very capable bike. And on the Transalp, it's like, okay, if you want me to, or sure, we can, probably. But it's not like, go faster, go harder. That's more than a little subjective, but I also feel like it doesn't matter what I'm doing on this bike. And it's part of that is I just have more experience on it, but it can handle a lot. Like, you can throw a lot at it. Really stupid decision making and things like that, it'll do it. Transalp, you just need to be a little more calculated, careful, and think about what you're doing and where you're going. So nothing earth-shattering, but definitely in terms of ease of use and, you know, what it's designed for and who I think will enjoy it the most. Just some initial thoughts there. So make sure that you're subscribed for more Transalp 750 content and the eventual full Transalp versus Tenere video side-by-side comparison. And don't forget to hit the notifications and the like button, because I'm the dork in the road and I want to be your internet riding buddy. And I'm better than your regular riding buddies because I come with a mute button. Thank you for watching, and please do not forget to be excellent to each other. Thank you.
Excellent!